Now that we've cast the Fellowship of the Ring and really got our main characters set, it's time to consider some other roles. If you're new here, I'm recasting Lord of the Rings for a full TV series to allow more time for the characters and the forgotten storylines. This is part 3 of the series. I was going to break it up by the books, but that seemed a little bit too heavy on the first one, so instead I decided to break it up in a different way. We've already cast our hobbits and the rest of the Fellowship, but we've got a lot of characters left. We'll tackle the elves, and then the humans, and one last episode for the forgotten characters. So don't fret if you've been waiting for Tom Bombadil, we'll get to him. But right now, we're going to tackle the big bads of the Lord of the Rings universe. I mean, it's natural, we got our good guys in place. We should figure out the bad. That means Gollum, Saruman, Wormtongue, and even the big bad himself, Sauron. So without further ado, let's recast Lord of the Rings. First off, we have the first villain we see, and although he doesn't get very much screen time, Christopher Lee owns the role of Saruman. Maybe it's because he's equally badass off-screen as he is on, or that he was a massive fan of Lord of the Rings and actually got to meet Tolkien, but he's perfect for the role. His portrayal of Saruman is menacing and wise, and in his limited screen time, you can really see the transformation into a dark wizard. In the books, he's described as having white hair with touches of black and a long face with dark circles around his eyes. You know, Christopher Lee. But unfortunately, we do have to look elsewhere. One of Saruman's best weapons is actually his voice, so we need someone with that dominating and deep voice that has wisdom behind it and all that menace. We need an older actor who feels like they're in control no matter who stands in front of them. So there's only one choice, Charles Dance. I mean, the man is the next best thing to Christopher Lee. He has all the requirements, the acting ability. It's really a no-brainer. If you've seen him in Game of Thrones or in The Crown, you already know.
Well, there are no 10 commandments, and a man can raise a thirst. For the temple bells are calling, and it's there that I would be.
But if you still need convincing, I thought I'd show a different clip of Charles Dance. We've all seen him in Game of Thrones and his portrayal. So here's proof that he can turn anything into a menacing, haunting line. Here's Charles Dance reading 50 Shades of Grey.
Let me ask you something first. Do you want a regular vanilla relationship with no kinky f***ery at all? Well, I did. Answer me, he says calmly. I flush. My inner goddess is down on bended knee with her hands clasped in supplication, begging me. I like your kinky f***ery, I whisper. Yeah, that's what I thought.
So Charles Dance as Saruman. Next up, we have Wormtongue. Now, I kind of had a little bit of an issue with this character in the movies. Not for performance, but in direction. Wormtongue looks like the most evil character I've ever seen in my entire life. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember from the books, he didn't look exactly like this. In the portrayal, there is zero subtlety. It's clear that Peter Jackson just wants you to know right off the bat that he's evil. But if we're doing a TV series, we can spend more time with this character. So I'd like to see Wormtongue from a different angle. In the books, he's described as wrinkled with age and a pale, wise face. In the movies, we're led to believe that Theoden actually is under a spell from Saruman, which allows Wormtongue to control him and kind of causes him to lose his youth and his motor functions. In the books, it's all Wormtongue, his power of persuasion, and possibly even using poison to weaken him. I'd really like to lean into this with the character, rather than having him as a sniveling, pale, nameless villain. I want an actor who has that voice and that presence. Don't get me wrong, I'm not looking for Chris Hemsworth. I want a character who preys on the fear of Theoden and knows his way around the persuasion, but I still want an actor who looks the part, worn and pale, but can get in your ear with false whispers. That's why I went with Sean Harris. He's best known for the Mission Impossible series, but even in a simple speech within the movie, you can see why he has the voice and the acting ability to get into a king's ear.
Your mission, should you choose to accept it. I wonder even, did you ever choose not to? Did you ever stop and ask yourself who it was giving you the orders or why? While every day the master you serve moves one step closer to ending the world.
With that voice, even with the simplest of line readings, it just feels a little bit off, as if it's been warped and distorted. He also has the look as well. I know he commonly has a beard, but if you shave it off, he actually has a surprisingly weak chin. Add a little makeup, make him a little bit paler, and we've got our Wormtongue. So Sean Harris as Grima Wormtongue. As for Gollum, a character who is both a massive technical achievement and an incredible performance. This is one of those roles that's incredibly difficult to recast. People just won't be able to wrap their hands around a different Gollum. Andy Serkis's career was launched from this role, and rightfully so. He's dynamic in both speech and movement of the character. Now, I know this was a time where they didn't fully capture Andy Serkis's performance, and his face was kind of animated, and not from Serkis himself. But still, I feel like he should have been nominated for that Oscar. He's become the king of motion capture. I mean, that's hard to top. Gollum's look is iconic. He's actually a Riverside Hobbit person, as described by Gandalf, but by the time we see him in the movie, he's unrecognizable from his original form. The movies did a wonderful job with his look. He's described as having protruding eyes, white skin, and having a long neck with a very large head. There is one thing I could possibly change with this character. A direct quote from The Hobbit says, "Gollum is dark as darkness, except for two big, round, pale eyes in his thin face." So he has a thin face. Yes, a small detail, but something that could really help differentiate from the original series. I want someone who can really embody that role and take on the physical nature of it. Someone young and spry, willing to get on their hands and knees. That's why I went with Bill Skarsgård. We've seen him as Pennywise, and his take on another otherworldly creature. He transformed both in performance and his voice.
Without your bow, you don't want to lose it, Georgie. Bill's gonna kill you. Here. Take it.
And Pennywise is a great example of what I want to do here. Makeup mixed with CGI, and it looks incredible. I want to go a slightly different direction with Gollum. So I want to bring some of Bill's features into the character, similar to Mark Ruffalo's Hulk. He has those big eyes which could be enlarged in post, and that thin face with some really interesting features. I want to see Bill's performance in the face, not just some CGI creature. Also, he pays a lot of attention to the movement of the character. Pennywise's stature and movement is one of the biggest things that make him so menacing and haunting. It's also worth noting his size. He is skinny, which would work well for Gollum, but also his height. He would need to be scaled down in post, but his 6'2" frame would allow for his limbs and his reach to be a more lanky Gollum, which would be interesting to see. I'd really like to see a new voice and see what Bill came up with. I think he'd do fantastic in the role. So Bill Skarsgård as Gollum. Last up, we have Sauron. Yes, I'm casting Sauron. I know many people won't like this because Sauron doesn't actually really appear in Lord of the Rings. We get his eye, even though it's not a literal eye, and his mouth, but we don't see him appear really in all his glory, at least out of the armor. But if in fact we were making Lord of the Rings a TV series, we'd have seasons and seasons and lots of time to spend with these characters. I would really like to see a one-episode story devoted to Sauron himself. Now, I'm not trying to change the masterpiece that is Lord of the Rings, but I've always wondered what made Sauron so powerful and special. We don't see it in the films, and I was always intrigued. Now, Sauron has a long and extremely complicated story. I won't try to get into it here, and honestly, I probably don't even know a fifth of it, but I read a lot about the character leading up to this, and it's incredibly interesting. In a sense, he's similar to Gandalf, and it might surprise you he was actually good once. And he was always not the big bad of this series, and he actually served another at one point. To give you reference, Sauron does change forms, but when he takes on a man, he's more elf-like. Here's an artist rendering of what he may have looked like before his fall of power. The clear choice is Benedict Cumberbatch, but unfortunately, if I'm going by my own rules, I cannot allow an actor to stay in this role. He played the Necromancer, which was eventually Sauron in the Hobbit trilogy, so we have to look elsewhere. That's why I think Joseph Fiennes would work really well. He has the look and that undertone menace to him. If you've seen him in Handmaid's Tale, you'd know that quiet, creepy nature to him that's very subtle, but has that off feeling.
You're looking well.
Thank you, sir.
Sorry to keep you out of here in the cold.
I'm fine.
Yes. Boston girl. Born and bred. I may be able to arrange a transfer for you there, if you prefer.
Your wife is here.
He could play the good and the bad side of the character and everything else in between. And I'd really like to see some backstory of the character that everyone fears most. So Joseph Fiennes as Sauron. So there are our villains of Lord of the Rings. Comment below letting me know your choices for these roles. I'm always really interested to hear them. And if you're interested, head over to a channel called Azart. They've been following my recastings and doing deepfakes of them. Last week they deepfaked my choice for Aragorn, Michael Fassbender, so head over to their channel and let them know I sent you. As always, thank you to my patrons, Jeremy Jacobs, Jenny Edwards, Gabe Marchand, Gunnar Lakeland, Colleen West, Marco Perry, Roland, Aiden McShange, Lon Hudson, Kieran Hunt, Joris Conan, Brandon Warner, Sweevy, Alex Towle, Derek B. Bell, Jacob Wolf, Alexander Gardulo, Lisa Hewer, and Rachel Kilker. Thank you for your support, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.